BC's 2022 budget was unveiled today in the legislature. There's a major turnaround when it comes to the shortfall for the current year. The deficit was expected to be more than $9 billion. It's actually now only $483 million. So why the suddenly rosier picture for BC? You can thank red-hot real estate sales. The government raked in $3.25 billion in property transfer tax last year. And ICBC is bringing in a lot more money than expected to government coffers. Here are some of the big line items. A record-setting $27.4 billion over 3 years allocated for capital projects, including the SkyTrain from Surrey to Langley. More money being spent on childcare, healthcare, as well as fire and flood recovery. And that means the NDP is projecting deficits for the next several years. Next year's deficit pegged at $5.4 billion. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. After a year of climate disasters and a pandemic that strained our healthcare system, the NDP government has decided on a budget that is big on spending. While the economy appears to be improving, critics say the province isn't doing enough to tackle affordability. CTV's Binder Sudjan reports on why last year had the government dramatically revising its forecast.
Armed with her budget speech, Finance Minister Selina Robinson entering the People's House.
BC's economic recovery is leading the nation.
Those listening perhaps wondering how it'll help them get into their own homes.
More than 32,000 new affordable homes are already built or they're on their way.
Sales are 33% higher in 2021 than the year before.
We now have the highest housing prices we've ever seen.
The province expecting to finish last year with a staggering $3.25 billion in property transfer taxes and $2.5 billion this year. A slight drop expected if interest rates move.
The reason why they're hoping for a slowdown in housing is that interest rates are going to go up, which is not something, frankly, that will give most British Columbians, pause for feeling good about things.
Of those 32,000 homes the minister references, only 6,300 are complete 4 years after the NDP promised to build 114,000 units over a decade.
You can't build housing in a year or 18 months. It's not how it works. Just before the pandemic, we were seeing some moderation in the housing market.
Critics say the province may be addicted to the cash flow and lack the political will to upset some voters.
I think we don't have a government that right now is wanting to take the measures to actually cause home prices to stall in order to restore affordability for all.
The so-called financial dumpster fire at ICBC now seeing the insurer in the black years after a taxpayer bailout. Many small and medium-sized businesses are struggling with pandemic impacts. The Greater Vancouver Board of Trade would have liked to see tax breaks and is worried by big spending.
Good to see that there is $2 billion set aside for pandemic recovery to continue, but almost half of that is set aside in contingency, so it's hard to know what those details are going to be.
Over 3 years, there's $1 billion to deal with climate change, $2.5 billion for climate emergencies, as well as $3 billion for health care. With a rainy day fund built in, the minister expects to end the 2022 budget year with a $5.5 billion shortfall. All of this is a projection at this point. What happens with the pandemic could be a risk, and it appears by the spending in this budget that the government thinks climate change could be another. Binder Sudjan, CTV News, Victoria.